Do you need home charging to live with an electric car? That's the question we're going to answer over the next 3 months with this MG4 long-term test car through the Drive garage. We're going to be putting thousands of Ks on this car, driving it in the city, in the country, testing its driving range, its charging speed, but all while using public chargers only. No charging at the home or the office. In this video, we're going to answer why we're doing this, why this electric car specifically, and of course, answer your questions. What do you want to know about this car? Whether it's you're buying an MG4 with home charging, or you're buying any electric car without somewhere to charge at home at all. Let us know in the comments and we'll do our best to answer it over the course of this test. Let's get started. Now, electric car fans may already be jumping into the comments to point out that most EV owners do their charging at home and don't use public charging stations other than long road trips across the country. However, we know that plenty of Aussies just don't have that luxury, whether you don't have off-street parking, or you live in an apartment building where you can't install a charger at home. That's the purpose of this test. We want to find out how hard and possibly how inconvenient it is to live with an EV for a long period of time without the ability to charge at home or the office. Now, speaking of the office, we have a 7 kilowatt wall box at the Drive office in Sydney. However, for the purpose of this, we are not going to use it. As I said, we're exclusively going to use public charging stations just to see what living with an EV without home charging is really like. For this test, we've selected the MG4 base model, the Excite 51. It priced from $39,990 to $49,990 drive away, depending on whether you get a 2023 or 2024 built version. Now, this one here is in base white paint, no cost option, the absolute most affordable model you can buy. Why this car? Well, firstly, we're big fans of the MG4 here at Drive. We crowned the Essence 64 version our best electric vehicle under $50,000 at the 2024 Drive Car of the Year. We like how it drives, the room inside, and the value proposition. Importantly, this being the base model, it has only 350 kilometers of claimed driving range. That means we'll be visiting public charging infrastructure more often than we would in, say, a Tesla Model 3 or a Hyundai Ioniq 6. We can do up to 600 kilometers of range on a single charge. Now, each time we plug in, we'll be testing how long we're charging for, how long we're waiting to charge, how much the charge costs, and also things you might not consider, like while the car's charging, how much money do you spend walking to the service station or into the shopping center upstairs to buy some food that you might not have otherwise had if you had a petrol car, refueled it, and got on the road. At the end of the loan, we'll calculate how much money we've spent and how much time we've spent to figure out, is driving an electric car without a home charger really all that inconvenient? Standard features in the MG4 Excite 51 include 17-inch alloy wheels with aero covers, LED headlights, a 10.25-inch infotainment touchscreen with wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, a 7-inch instrument display, cloth seats, a 4-speaker sound system, adaptive cruise control, and lane centering assist. So we've been living this MG4 for a couple of weeks now. We've had some time to build up some first impressions. Plenty good, but some also not so good. Number one, as you might have just seen there, this sill is quite large between the inside of the car and this plastic piece on the outside on the side skirt, which means that sometimes when you get out, I find myself brushing the back of my pants on this plastic piece. Not the end of the world, but when it rains and that fills up with water, it does get a little bit annoying. Speaking of inside, let's go have a look. So inside the MG4 now, and this interior, it's fair to say it is on the simple side in terms of its design. Now, some people will like that. I don't mind the way it's laid out, but other people will prefer the more ostentatious layout you do get in something like a BYD or a GWM product. Now, these seats in this base model variant are cloth and they're only manually adjustable. There's also no heating or any sort of fancy functions like that. They're pretty comfortable, though we do look forward to testing them on longer drives the more we drive this car. But I will say initially, I would like a little bit more under-thigh support. Not the best in that area, but otherwise they are quite nice. The cloth is quite soft and it's cool blue stitching that does help break up this otherwise quite black interior. In terms of space inside the car, I'm 6'1", and I do have plenty of room in here to move. The steering wheel is tilt and reach adjustable, which is not something we've seen in a lot of previous MG cars, including the new MG3 hybrid hatch that's just arrived in Australia. But otherwise, headroom's great. I do find myself whacking my knee on this center console bit where the shifter is, but in the end, it's not the end of the world, though again, your mileage may vary in that regard. In terms of materials, you do have some scratchy plastics on the doors as well as around the center console. But again, this is a car built to a price, and you do have some sort of squidgy material on the dash, and it is not the end of the world. The armrest here in the middle is soft as well as the one on the doors. So yeah, overall, not a whole lot to complain about in that regard. They have two screens in the front of this car. You've got a 10.25-inch infotainment touchscreen, as well as a 7-inch display in front of me here for the driver instruments. This infotainment screen is something we have commented on in past MG4 reviews. A couple of things. It's not the most responsive screen in the world. You can press it and sometimes it doesn't always respond to your input. The graphics are a bit on the basic side. They're very grey and very square and could do a little bit more to jazz that up. You'll notice there are no climate control buttons under this touchscreen, apart from a few little shortcuts here and there. But there is a way to customise it. We will be working with that the more we have this car and get it out on the road, and we'll report back in our later instalments. You do have buttons up and down for controlling your volume. No knob though, but in the end, you do have a physical control, so that is nice. Otherwise, this screen in front of me here is clear, basic, not a whole lot to report about it. You can't display a full screen map, for example, but it does the job, and you can use the buttons on the steering wheel to control. It is fairly easy to use once you get your head around it. So you've got wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Now it is worth noting it does only go through the USB-A port, not the newer USB-C plug you also got down here. And even our first couple of weeks with this car, it is a little bit fiddly. Sometimes it drops out and it is always the most reliable connection. We'll see if that improves with time. We might try a different cable to see if we can make that a little bit better. Other things to note, you've got a 4-speaker stereo only in this base model Excite 51 grade. It's not a powerhouse, obviously, as you'd expect with only 4 speakers, particularly in the back, because all your speakers are in the front of the car. But to be honest, it's not as bad as we thought when we picked it up, and it's something we definitely can live with. The reversing camera isn't the highest quality, and it's something you do notice particularly at night when you're trying to park on a dark street without any lighting in quite a tight space. Now, one of the things you have to get used to when you first get in the MG4 for the first time is there is no start button to turn it on. You just sit in the seat, put your foot on the brake, and go. Something that's increasingly common in electric cars, something that Tesla in particular pioneered. And look, it's not for everyone, and we have noticed it can be a little bit fiddly at times. If you do the sequence in the wrong way, whether you put your foot on the brake before you close the driver's door, it can not always fire and get a little bit confused, but we'll see how we go the more we drive this car, and if it's something that we're doing wrong, or it's something we just need to get used to over time. Now, in terms of storage, it is pretty good. You've got a decent size center console as well as a glove box over there. Some open storage in the bottom of the center console as well as 2 cup holders. But overall, not a whole lot to complain about. It's a pretty simple interior, but it is pretty effective for the most part, though there are some room for improvement. Let's head to the back. Now, if you thought the front of the MG4 was simple, the back does take it up a notch. There's not a whole lot back here in the way of amenities. You've got no mat pockets on the back of the seats, no rear air vents, no fold-down armrests or anything along those lines. But you do have a USB port for charging devices, and fortunately space is pretty good back here. We've got pretty good knee room here, good headroom as well as some toe room under the front seats, even though they're in their lowest position. Now, I will say, being an electric car, there is a battery under the floor, so the floor is quite high, and it means you do feel a little bit perched up on the seat base. As you can see, there's a bit of room under my knees there. But overall, it's not too bad back here. The black headlining does make it a little bit dark, and there's no illumination of any sort, which is a little bit of a miss, but otherwise, it is a pretty nice place to spend time. Now, in the first couple of weeks with this car, we have had 3 people across the back at one time. Look, it is a squeezy experience. This is a small car after all, but not completely unbearable, and you can do it for short trips if you do need to. On the whole, it does the job. Not amazing, but also not terrible either. Let's head to the boot. In the boot now, and you can see MG claims 363 litres of space, which is middle of the pack for the small car class. In terms of amenities, you've got LED lights on the side, and to be honest, that's about it. You've got a bag hook here, but there's not a whole lot to talk about in this boot. Now, under the floor, you've got a tyre repair kit, no spare wheel, very common for electric cars, but it doesn't give you anywhere to actually put this bag of cables. It doesn't really fit on the side there or in the net pocket on the right-hand side here. It kind of just flops around in the boot and fights a space with your luggage. Not the best, and there's no front storage area under the bonnet either, so it sort of just has to flop around and rattle as you drive. Not the best solution, and I wish there was a little bit of space under the floor that could really solve that problem. There's something to note while we're back here is these base Excite version of the MG4 don't have a rear spoiler on the top like you get on the more expensive models. Now, each of their own. Let us know what you think in the comments below, but I think it does cheapen the look a little bit. It looks kind of awkward without that top spoiler there completing the look, and you also don't get the full width taillight bar. You get this little black stick-on spoiler. I'm not a huge fan. I don't know if it's worth spending an extra couple of grand for the Essence model just for a spoiler alone. Obviously, you do get some extra equipment as well, but yeah, what do you think? Let us know in the comments below. Now, if you're new to electric cars, you might think that every electric car charger out there does work with your car, but that's not the case. Tesla chargers in particular, the network is increasingly opening up to electric cars from other brands, but not every single station does work quite yet. This one here behind me is still limited to just Tesla vehicles only, but that may change in the future. Now, while we're talking about charging stations that don't always work properly, The MG4 uses a standard called CCS2. It's the common standard used by most electric cars in Australia, including Teslas. You'll see some chargers around called Chatamo stations. Those are used by Nissan Leafs and a few other cars here and there. Fortunately, there aren't too many of those around, so you won't encounter them most of the time, but it is worth noting that not every charger that you see on the road can be used by your electric car, such as this MG4. Powering the base MG4 is a 125 kilowatt and 250 newton meter electric motor driving the rear wheels. Fed by a 50.8 kilowatt hour battery pack, good for 350 kilometers of claimed driving range in European WLTP testing. MG claims a 10 to 80% recharge time of 37 minutes at up to 88 kilowatts DC. Now those outputs of 125 kilowatts and 250 newton meters may not sound like much for an electric car that normally has quite a big heavy battery, but don't be mistaken, this car is absolutely not slow. MG claims 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 7.7 seconds, which look, it's not hot hatch fast, but it by no means is it slow, and it's actually quite perky for a small car that's not trying to be a performance vehicle. An electric motor means you get instant performance off the mark. It's really, really responsive, really zippy, and actually a lot of fun to drive around town, moving to little gaps in traffic and just navigating the city streets. Unlike a lot of electric cars in this price range, the MG4 is rear-wheel drive, not front-wheel drive. And what that means is it's keen to turn into corners and you can feel it pushing you out of bends rather than pulling you. Now you can spin up the wheels if you accelerate a little bit too briskly out of a T-junction, and the traction control is a little bit aggressive at times, particularly in the wet, but it's not the end of the world, and if you're a bit cautious with the throttle, it is absolutely not a problem. As for the steering wheel itself is on the larger side, but the steering is quite light, but also quite direct. It's quite enjoyable to use around town, and there's actually quite a small turning circle, which makes it easier when parking or maneuvering tight city streets. Now, in terms of ride comfort, something like a BYD or a Great Wall will be more comfortable over bumps if that's your priority. By no means it's uncomfortable, but it is on the firmer side compared to those other vehicles. The problem that it does have is the road noise. You hear quite a lot of noise coming from the rear suspension over bumps, and also even semi-smooth pieces of road that aren't the best surfaced. There's a bit of a resonance and a bit of a booming sound that comes through the cabin that does start to grate after a while. Even though this is a small city-focused electric car, I think it might actually be better on the open road than in the city, and that's something we look forward to testing when we get more time with this car over the next couple of weeks and months. Some dislikes: you don't get rear cross traffic alert or blind spot monitoring in this model. Now I get you can't have everything to hit that low price, but still it would be nice to have in a car that's aimed towards city driving. Now it is also worth mentioning the visibility out the rear is not fantastic. It's a bit of a letterbox size window, and there's actually quite a large center headrest that really does get in the way of your visibility. Fortunately though, visibility out the front and the side is pretty good, though it would be nice to have front parking sensors to complement those that are already standard at the rear. Now this is something we'll be able to explore in more depth the longer we have this car, but our initial impressions of the safety systems are they do need a little bit of work. The lane centering assist seems to wander from side to side in the lane, bouncing off the lane markings. It's not the best calibrated, and the general lane keep assist can be a little bit intrusive at times, and also the forward collision warning can be a bit sensitive. But again, that's something we'll test over a longer period when we get this car on country roads that aren't as well marked as those in some of the city areas we've been driving so far. So that's what we think of our new MG4 long-term test car. But what do you want to know? Do you have any questions about charging or the MG4 specifically? Ask us in the comments below or in the written piece, linked in the description, and we'll do our best to answer them while we have this car. If you enjoyed this video, please click like and make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss when we answer your questions about this car and give our final verdict on what it's like to live with this MG4.